Chapter 2: The Guerrilla Band. 1. The Guerrilla Fighter. Social Reformer. Che Guevara with Chile's President Salvador Allende. We have already described the guerrilla fighter as one who shares the longing of the people for liberation and who, once peaceful means are exhausted, initiates the fight and converts himself into an armed vanguard of the fighting people. From the very beginning of the struggle, he has the intention of destroying an unjust order, and therefore an intention, more or less hidden, to replace the old with something new. We have also already said that in the conditions that prevail, at least in America, and in almost all countries with deficient economic development, it is the countryside that offers ideal conditions for the fight. Therefore, the foundation of the social structure that the guerrilla fighter will build begins with changes in the ownership of agrarian property. The banner of the fight throughout this period will be agrarian reform. At first, this goal may or may not be completely delineated in its extent and limits. It may simply refer to the age-old hunger of the peasant for the land on which he works or wishes to work. The conditions in which the agrarian reform will be realized depend upon the conditions which existed before the struggle began, and on the social depth of the struggle. But the guerrilla fighter, as a person conscious of a role in the vanguard of the people, must have a moral conduct that shows him to be a true priest of the reform to which he aspires. To the stoicism imposed by the difficult conditions of warfare should be added an austerity born of rigid self-control that will prevent a single excess, a single slip, whatever the circumstances. The guerrilla soldier should be an ascetic. As for social relations, these will vary with the development of the war. At the beginning, it will not be possible to attempt any changes in the social order. Merchandise that cannot be paid for in cash will be paid for with bonds, and these should be redeemed at the first opportunity. The peasant must always be helped technically, economically, morally, and culturally. The guerrilla fighter will be a sort of guiding angel who has fallen into the zone, helping the poor always, and bothering the rich as little as possible in the first phases of the war. But this war will continue on its course. Contradictions will continuously become sharper. The moment will arrive when many of those who regarded the revolution with a certain sympathy at the outset will place themselves in a position diametrically opposed, and they will take the first step into battle against the popular forces. At that moment, the guerrilla fighter should act to make himself into the standard bearer of the cause of the people, punishing every betrayal with justice. Private property should acquire in the war zones its social function. For example, excess land and livestock, not essential for the maintenance of a wealthy family, should pass into the hands of the people and be distributed equitably and justly. The right of the owners to receive payment for possessions used for the social good ought always to be respected, but this payment will be made in bonds. Bonds of hope, as they were called by our teacher, General Bayo, referring to the common interest that is thereby established between debtor and creditor. The land and property of notorious and active enemies of the revolution should pass immediately into the hands of the revolutionary forces. Therefore, taking advantage of the heat of the war, those moments in which human fraternity reaches its highest intensity, all kinds of cooperative work, as much as the mentality of the inhabitants will permit, ought to be stimulated. The guerrilla fighter as a social reformer should not only provide an example in his own life, but he ought also constantly to give orientation in ideological problems, explaining what he knows and what he wishes to do at the right time. He will also make use of what he learns as the months or years of the war strengthen his revolutionary convictions, making him more radical as the potency of arms is demonstrated, as the outlook of inhabitants becomes a part of his speech and of his own life, and as he understands the justice and the vital necessity of a series of changes, of which the theoretical importance appeared to him before, but devoid of practical urgency. This development occurs very often because the initiators of guerrilla warfare, or rather the directors of guerrilla warfare, are not men who have bent their backs day after day over the furrow, They are men who understand the necessity for changes in the social treatment accorded peasants without having suffered in the usual case this bitter treatment in their own persons. It happens then, I am drawing on the Cuban experience and enlarging it, that a genuine interaction is produced between these leaders who, when their acts teach the people the fundamental importance of the armed fight, and the people themselves who rise in rebellion and teach the leaders these practical necessities of which we speak. Thus, as a product of this interaction between the guerrilla fighter and his people, a progressive radicalization appears which further accentuates the revolutionary characteristics of the movement and gives it a national scope.